Hey, it's Mary. Welcome back to my channel where I share with you tips and tricks that I've learned on my writing journey to help you on yours. Today we're going to be talking about how to build a character voice. It's a very common term in writing and it can be kind of confusing. And even if it's not kind of confusing, I want to explain to you a little bit everything that it entails, and I probably am going to leave out some stuff or forget to mention some stuff. And so if I fail to mention something that you have on your mind about the topic, feel free to mention it in the comments and help each other out. Now, listen to my voice. What do you hear? What are some of the repeated tics that I use when I speak? Now think about your voice. What does it sound like? You hear it every day, even in your head. Is it quick or slow? Is it observant or absent-minded? Do you hate how often you say or like? Do you even have an internal monologue? Do you swear a lot? And if so, what are the words that you often go to? When you see somebody else, what's the first thing you notice about them? Is it how they compare to you? The thing about writing a unique character voice is that you might need to take all of that into consideration. Now, there are two main ways people go about writing books. Single point of view, which is when you have one character basically narrating the entire story. The whole story is from their point of view. Or you can do multiple point of views, which is when one chapter you have Elaine narrating, it's from her point of view, and in the next chapter you have Draco, and it's from a totally different point of view because he's a different person. I would say that really stressing about a unique character voice is less imperative when it comes to a single point of view, but obviously it's still important to set your character apart from other books and other stories. You also want them to be as realistic as possible no matter how many point of views you have, and real people have their own little quirks and tics that they use when talking. Everyone has their own vernacular that they bend towards because of their upbringing or their surroundings. The goal with the character voice is to write in a way that makes their identity obvious from, hopefully, a single piece of dialogue. Or a single piece of, I suppose, maybe inner monologue. But the saying is that you want to be able to distinguish your characters through a single line of dialogue. If your story is in first person, oh, I forgot I had a squirrel skull on my bookshelf. I was like, what is that? If you write your story in first person, it will feel more like their literal voice. If your story is in third person, it will feel more like you're being told about how your character acts or thinks, or you are doing the telling of how your character acts and thinks. But it's still going to be directly related to your character and their voice. So worldview and perspective plays a huge part in what the character's voice is going to sound like. When you think of a voice, you think of the actual sound, the timbre of the voice, the tone. And while I'll get into that later a little bit, a character voice is more about how a character chooses to speak than it is about the sound of their voice. A character who has had a trauma in their past might relate whatever is going on in a scene to those past events. If somebody was abused growing up or they have a bad relationship with their father, they will see a father with his son doing normal things differently than somebody who has a decent relationship with their dad. A character who grew up in the city is going to have a different view on it than somebody visiting for the first time. They'll process events or even small observations and small daily tasks differently. I know that when I went to New York for the first time, I loved it. The subway was so cool. But the people who are native to New York, the locals, they get on the subway and they think it's gross and they want to get off and they know they're like, oh, some crazy guy's going to come on and threaten all of us someday. Two totally different points of view. Think about the character voice as a well-balanced pattern. You have recurring pieces that need to be implemented strategically to build up your character in order to set them apart. And a good trick to making your character's voice consistent and to make that pattern very balanced is to tie it directly to their personality. Some writers will use the Myers-Briggs personality test, and I have to agree, it is useful. I do find it very intriguing. And if your character happens to be introverted, they'll likely speak less in certain situations than an extroverted character would. Just type in Myers-Briggs if you don't know what it is. I feel like most people do, and then you go in and you take the test, and you answer each of the questions as if you were your character. And it helps you kind of figure out their personality. But when you're writing, consider, is this something that lines up with their personality? Is this something that lines up with their values? And if not, do I have a good reason for making them say it anyway? The first chapter is essential to solidifying a unique character voice. Last video I uploaded was actually about how to write a killer opening chapter, so watch that if you need advice on how to do so. You don't want to write a story where a character is very extroverted at the beginning Or in the first chapter and then the second chapter, they start saying and doing things that don't align with how they acted in the first chapter. If you write a character to have a southern drawl in the first chapter, in the first few chapters, and then it suddenly drops off and you forget to carry it on, people are going to notice. It's going to stand out. So you want your voice for your character to be consistent, but also not overdone. A voice that's too unique is going to be hard for readers to trudge through without getting stuck on the words and being pulled out of the story. Now, like I said, in a single point of view, it's easier to get away with a more standard basic writing style. I'm not saying that that's necessarily a good thing. You obviously want your characters to stand out and be fresh and unique in as many ways as you can make them. But when you have a multiple point of view story, which contains 2, 3, even more than that characters, with their own personalities and their own backgrounds, it is very, very important that you set each of them apart. And this is where the more practical side comes into play, where you change up their dialogue and you change up the mannerisms that they use when talking so as not to confuse the reader. I've read books sometimes where it's supposed to be a different point of view and I get stuck reading it in one of the other characters' voices because there's not enough differentiating them, and then I have to go back and go, wait a second, this doesn't make sense. And yeah, that would be a good thing to avoid as a writer. You don't want that. The idea of, oh, a cat! A cat is outside. The style of multi-point of view stories has really grown in the last, I don't know, probably decade. And so the conversation around character voices has grown considerably. Point of view stories existed before 2015, however, not in the degree that they do now, where you have like Sarah J. Maas books that have 5+ point of views in them, and you're like trying to juggle all of these voices, and then the book is like freaking massive because how else can you make all of these point of views relevant if not making the story more complex? I'm getting away from myself. It feels like every book nowadays has at least one chapter that's from a different point of view. Even if the entire book is not written in it, the epilogue is going to be from the love interest point of view, or a perspective of a side character randomly thrown in. Don't get me wrong, I love multiple point of views in stories. Big fan. A lot of my stories that I write have multiple point of views because I think it's fun. I did in fact read the fan-made Reese point of view for Court of Mist and Fury. Guilty as charged. Some of my favorite books utilize multiple point of views. I'm switching to my phone mic because sometimes my computer does this thing while I'll hit record and then it doesn't record, and then I just have to wait like a day, and I don't want to wait a day to finish this video, so I'm just going to use my phone. Anyway, in one of the stories that I'm writing, there are 2 point of views. The characters come from wildly different backgrounds, and they have very different morals. So the way they handle situations is different. The way I write them is different. The one comes from a very educated, well-off society, so they have a more well-rounded vocabulary and use more sophisticated habits, while the other one is considered a lowlife and uses more slang. One is more reactive and uses more explosive dialogue, while the other one is better at taking things in stride and throwing a joke out in the middle of a tense situation. Some very distinct character voices that come to mind are Percy Jackson. Percy Jackson is, at least in the first books, it's middle grade, and so it's going to feel more straightforward and to the point in the writing. But I still think Rick Riordan did a good job of making Percy's voice feel alive. From the very first sentence, it is, I didn't want to be a half-blood, and if you're a half-blood, run away. It very much comes across as Percy Jackson. It's a very unique voice, and it is also a single point of view. So, like I said, it's not just multiple point of views that this is useful for. It's obviously single point of views also, because that is what the majority of books throughout the entire course of history are written in. But it's easier to talk about different character voices when you can compare it to different voices within its own book. Anyway, another one is Emily Wilde's Encyclopedia of Fairies. Again, it is first person because it's written like a journal, and it is also single point of view, except for a couple chapters where the point of view is from a different character's perspective. I love these books, and I'm going to mention them in my What I Read in February video that I'm going to put out at the end of February or beginning March, I don't know. Since it's written as a journal, it's very almost academic because Emily Wilde is a researcher. She is a professor and researcher in Dryadology, which is like the study of fairies and whatnot. So the way she writes is very academic. It's very vocabulary heavy. It feels very smart. When I then consider the way the other character talked in the book, in the chapters that he wrote, it's so easy to differentiate them. Like the character voices between Emily and Wendell, it's very contrasting, and it's very easy to compare them and go, wow, these are two different characters. One is very academic, very logical, very observant, and the other one is much more flowery and charming and charismatic. And then the final example I'm going to use is The Sun is Also a Star. So in the book you have two characters, and it's from it's from many point of views, but it's specifically the two main characters is Daniel and Natasha, and the way in which the author writes them is very different. So you have Daniel, who is the poet. He is much more, he thinks with his heart, whereas Natasha thinks with her head. So the way that Daniel talks is much more full of wonder and pondering, whereas Natasha's is very cut and dry, black and white, and a little bit harsh. The way she thinks and the way she observes things is harsh. She tends to jump to the negative because she just doesn't see value in wishing and hoping her life away. Daniel starts many of his chapters off with I don't even know how to describe it really. I'll just insert a picture like this. It's like a title, like a heading, and he has a lot of parenthetical thoughts within his point of views, lots of parentheses. The parentheses were almost overdone, in my opinion, but it definitely sets it apart. And Natasha has this little quirk of saying observable fact. I'll insert a picture. She says something is a fact, and then she states the fact. The way that the author does this is aligned with their personality and their worldview and their interests, because Natasha is into space and physics, while as Daniel is into poetry and writing and love. There are so many other examples, though, that I could give that I just don't want to drag this video down to the depths of YouTube with. So let me know in the comments other examples or things that come to your mind. I've not read every single book in the world, so I'm sure there are some out there that are even better than the examples I gave. How does this all look practically? I mean, I kind of already talked about practically, right? Like I mentioned that Daniel uses parenthetical thoughts, and there's different ways of writing the character, I suppose. But when it comes to the actual sitting down and typing out the character, how do you do that? Well, for one, consider the rhythm. I would say to vary the rhythm of how your character thinks and talks. Does your character speak quickly, or do they take their time laying out a thought? You can do this by varying sentence length. I know we're always told in writing to vary sentence length in general by incorporating long sentences and short sentences to keep things from getting jilted, but you can sparingly utilize this method to differentiate your character's speaking rhythms. Do they interrupt people when they talk? Are they more likely to be hesitant or confident when they open their mouth? This is going to affect how much they talk. It's also going to affect how you start certain sentences. If a character is hesitant, they might use bumper words and brace what they're going to say with, well, I don't know if this is really true, but I was thinking that maybe we could do this, whereas somebody more confident would say, hey, we should do this because of this reason. You could also vary your word choice. This is what I was talking about with vernacular and slang. What kind of profanity they use, what kind of tics they use when talking, like little sounds that they make, or think of it like a person's tell when gambling, like when they're lying, what's their tell? But it's what's their tic when they talk? What's the thing that they always do that you can almost identify them with? What are different phrases that they say or sayings that come up in their dialogue often? This doesn't even have to be dialogue exclusive. You can do this with thought or exposition as well, because like with The Sun is Also a Star, how I said that with the way they write, it's the character's thoughts, right? So it isn't just dialogue that is supposed to be unique. It's also the inner monologue or the narration. You can vary language. This one's pretty simple. If your character is bilingual, then implement different words and utilize that other language. Like if a character is trying to think of a word and they can't remember it in English, so they say it in Spanish. You can also vary the focus of the character, which I feel like I might have touched on. It's whether they focus on the perception of others, aka anxiety or insecurity? What are they focusing on when they interact with other people and with the world? This can be heavily impacted by upbringing and experiences. Where were they born? Are they the youngest of a lot of siblings, or the oldest, or are they an only child? Even that can have a big impact on a character's voice. Lastly, that I'm going to mention, you can also vary a character's interest. This is kind of like focus, but it's more specifically about literal interests or hobbies that a character has, less about the internal feelings. How much do they talk about themselves? Are they narcissistic? How much do they talk about politics? Or how much do they even know about politics or history? Now, you don't necessarily have to use or implement every single one of these examples that I've given, especially not to death. Please do whatever you do in a balanced way without overdoing it. These things are good to consider, though, if you're struggling to build the voice. Be wary of using improper grammar or improper speech in order to differentiate a character. I see this a lot in books where a side character is supposed to be either impoverished or uneducated or from a different country, and they will overdo the broken English or the improper English in order to get the point across that this person is different. It's not taboo. You see it in books quite often, but it can come across as, one, stereotyping, which not only runs the risk of offending people. That is not to say that you should not do things just because you don't want to offend people. That's not what I'm saying. But also because it can run the risk of drawing the reader out of the story. Any writing that isn't smooth or natural will get tripped over. You can do so occasionally for sure if you're really set on it, but I would caution against it, and I would definitely caution against flooding every single line of dialogue that said character has with hard to digest speech. I would focus more on changing word choice or slang with the occasional broken English or improper grammar. This doesn't mean that people don't talk like that in real life. They absolutely do, and there's nothing wrong with it. If English is not your first language, there's nothing wrong with speaking broken English. And if you really want to write this way, I'm sure you can get away with it. But it's something that I don't do, just as I wouldn't suggest you write a person one-to-one with how they actually speak in real life ever, no matter who they are or how they talk. I mean, most people use an ungodly amount of filler words when they speak, and we don't put that in the writing because it doesn't make for good writing. It doesn't make for an easy read or an enjoyable read. That's my take on the topic anyway. There are some ways that you can practice writing your character's voice. You can write 5 to 10 pages on a topic in your character's point of view as if it's a diary or a journal. Or you can write 2 different point of views for the same prompt and contrast which character focuses on what when it comes to the same prompt or topic. You can also take a chapter from your story if it's already written and duplicate it. Obviously, don't change the original. And then remove every dialogue tag. Anytime you see a blank said or blank spoke or blank commented, whatever, remove it. Read the passage and see if you can still figure out who's speaking, which might be easy for you as the writer because you wrote the thing. Maybe you can also share that writing or whatever with a trusted individual and say, can you give this a read and tell me if it's easy to differentiate who's talking without dialogue tags? It's just an idea. I've never done it, but it might be fun. This next one is something that I actually do a little bit, and it's what the author of The Sun Is Also a Star also did. Pick a grammatical tool or a specific punctuation and attribute it to a specific character. M dash, parentheses, italics, semicolons. Obviously, it's not only that character that you are allowed to write that punctuation with, but where you might have maybe 1 or 2 M dashes in a chapter with character A, character B, you might have twice or 3 times as many because that's just, their brain jumps around from thought to thought. Daniel did this in The Sun Is Also a Star. He had a ton of parentheses. I don't remember a single time Natasha's point of view used parentheses. I'm sure they were there, but I don't remember them. And it's because Daniel kind of stole the attention away and said, nope, this is mine actually. I'm going to use it for me. And I think that's fun. I think it's simple. And then this is more so for you as the writer. Write each point of view in a different font. As you're writing or after the fact, go back, change the fonts. That way, when you are writing it, you can use the font. And it will help you immerse yourself into the thoughts and mindset of that character. And so when you're writing in the font, you might actually find that it's easier to draw that character's voice out from yourself because you are placing yourself in the familiar territory of that character. I don't know if any of those are going to help you. I'm sorry if they don't. Because I already said that I was going to talk about it, and I am going to talk about it, let's now talk about what does the voice actually sound like. This is not specifically what people refer to when they're talking about the voice, big TM, capitalized. It's not related to the words they use. It's not related to anything we've already mentioned. But it's still good and useful for reminding you and the readers what your character sounds like. It can help them feel more alive, more off the page. I mean, you'll read a book and the author will say, a gravelly voice said from behind me. I'm not going to say all of the adjectives that you could use for a character's voice. The first ones that come to mind, however, is metallic, or warm, metallic or silvery or warm. There's a YouTuber that I watch, and she is a vocal coach. So she helps people sing, I suppose, better. And when she reacts to music videos, she often uses the term metallic or warm for a person's voice. So when a character has a very sharp, almost tinny, very piercing voice, she calls it metallic. That's how she explained Lisa in the Born Again music video. And then when she was explaining Ray, she said her voice was very warm and rounded and deep, which, I mean, Ray comes from soul and R&B, so it makes sense. Using actual adjectives to paint a character's voice can help with making them come alive. And here are some examples of different adjectives you can use. You can go on Pinterest or Google and type in different adjectives for a voice, and you'll find plenty of options. I have in the past gone through people I know personally and assigned them an adjective for their voice that I thought matched them because I think it's fun. And I have no idea what my voice sounds like. I have a lot of vocal fry, so it's probably not a smooth description. People probably don't think of my voice as very smooth. Anyway, the final thing I want to leave you with is a reminder that although your character needs to be written consistently, if their arc allows for it, you absolutely can evolve their voice over the course of the story. It should still be consistent with the events in the story. It shouldn't be from out of left field. There should be a valid explanation for why it has changed. But if a character experiences a major growth or a major trauma, you can change their voice accordingly. There is still a baseline that people inherently will always speak like and always gravitate towards just based on human nature. But there are a lot of aspects of the voice that you can twist, that you can change, that you can grow. How it looks is totally dependent on your vision for your story. You can think of it like a character either coming into who they were meant to be or devolving into a tragic husk of who they were meant to be. So that's all I have for you today. It's going to be another long video. Sorry if you don't like that. I like watching long videos. I don't like making long videos because then I have to edit it. Thank you for watching. I really appreciated you coming and spending time. I know it's not much, but I'm just here trying to help you and building a community where we can help each other. So yeah, comment down below what your thoughts are. Did I leave anything out that you thought I should have mentioned, or did you learn something that you didn't know before? Did I bring to light something you had never considered? And also comment who your favorite character is of all time in any book. And yeah, I try to post every week, every Thursday if I can. So come back next week for another video. Turn on the bell if you really, really, really want to watch the video. Although I don't know why you would. I'm kind of a nobody. It's been fun. Stay creative. Bye.